Professor Domondon is back and welcomes you to part 3 of his lectures. Part 3 now starts with the analytical techniques for objective questions. So you notice I've classified the different types of questions because the manner of approaching, the manner of analysis, although similar are entirely different. So start now with what is the analytical approach for discussion type of questions? So there must be a careful and thorough reading of the ones of the examiner, which is define, cite, state, enumerate, or distinguish. Do not be frightened when you see the word cite. Your examiner is not asking you to state the specific provisions as Article so and so of the Penal Code, Article so and so of the Civil Code. He's not asking you for that. Neither is asking you for the exact citation, including the GR number and date of promulgation. What he's asking is for you to state the doctrine involved, the essence of the law involved, and not cite the case. But if you could cite the case, just the title or the article number, then well and good, you'll be able to impress him. So, after this, you're going to have a quick recall of legal concepts. In the recall of legal concepts, remember the mind of man works through association of ideas. When you see a word, this is associated with your experiences that you've read. For example, you see the words San Francisco. Depending on your proclivity, the word San Francisco would recall for you various thoughts. For example, if you left your heart in San Francisco, you know what you're going to remember. If you're particularly religious, you would remember Saint Francis the Saint. You would remember Francis the Pope. So also, if you're fond of plants, you will remember the plant San Francisco. And then after having recalled the thoughts that are applicable to the question, you visualize the length of your answer. Why must you visualize the length of your answer? Because you found out a while ago that there is a limit to the time within which you're going to write your answer, depending of course on the weight. Then and only then should you write your answer. Then, after finishing it, review your answer for missing words, misspelled words, and grammatical errors. When you review, it's not for the purpose of changing your answer entirely, because you're going to lose time if you do that. Instead, you merely look for missing words, misspelled words, and grammatical errors. That is why even before you write the first word, you must carefully reflect, considering, of course, the time limit that is available for you. What are direct responses to the different kinds of objective questions? See, definition, your preparatory step should be, example, there is a question of law when, and then state. For enumeration, the following are the instances when a legally dismissed employee may be granted separation pay instead of reinstatement. Distinction, the distinctions between his evidence and opinion evidence are. So, you know the answer, but it's very long. And you're sure you could not write it down within the time limitation as shown by the weight. So therefore, you must learn and practice how to summarize. Then, how do you expose a complete answer? And how do you camouflage a wrong answer? This analysis is particularly useful when you talk about the enumeration type. For example, you ask for the distinctions, you enumerate distinctions. For example, you ask to enumerate the requisites. But how do you expose a complete answer? And how do you camouflage a wrong answer? Example. The question was asked, what marriages are void for reasons of public policy? If an examiner asks this, he knows there are 9 marriages. Therefore, expecting to see 9, and once you see 9, it's probable that you might not even read carefully your answer, whether the 9 is correct or not. So what are you going to do? So you use what I refer to as the vertical type of numbering using the Arabic system of numbering. So therefore, when you write your answer in this manner, At first glance, your examiner will see that you've written 9 already. As I said, he has the time to read. It's possible that after having seen 9, he'll give you full credit for it already. So, no. Vertical technique using the Arabic system of numbering. But supposing you know there are 9, but unfortunately, forgotten 3 of them, what are you going to do? Are you still going to use the vertical type and then repeat uh, or split one of the numbers? No, this is unethical. Do not do that because if your examiner discovers it, he might again deduct certain points from your answer if he sees it, especially that your answer is supposed because it's arranged according to the vertical type and there are numbers. So what are you going to do? Instead, I suggest that you use the horizontal type of answering. What is the horizontal type of answering to camouflage an incomplete answer? You state the kinds horizontally without numbering, such as this one. So you just keep on writing all those that you could remember. So you have this, and then notice. If you're going to read carefully, you will notice that 3 items are missing. But your examiner does not have time, and it's highly probable that as a result of this, he must give you full credit for it. So I said, use the vertical and horizontal type for exposing a complete answer and camouflaging an incomplete answer, especially in instances where you have enumeration questions. We're finished with that. So let's now have a look at essay questions. The different essay questions, again, needs different kinds of analysis, different kinds of attack. But let's look at the composition of the essay questions. When you look at the pie chart, you would notice that 20% are basic. And then you have the case base, which is 20%, and you have 55% hypothetical questions. When I say hypothetical questions, these are the pure inventions of the examiner. And then you have a 5% uh, number with respect to crazy questions. So, what are crazy questions? Crazy questions are the questions sometimes that are given out of the blue. These questions are never usually discussed during the undergraduate, then also discussed during the bar review. So the student is going to be caught by surprise. That's basically the reason why you have these crazy questions, which is to test the reaction to surprises. Because in practice, normally there are a lot of surprises. And therefore, this is to test the nerve the would be lawyer under pressure. Thus, you know how to react under pressure. Now, interestingly, in the 2019 bar exams, the chairperson, Justice Perlas Bernabe, specifically stated that there will be no crazy questions asked, especially according to her, they should never be given in the first 3 numbers of the bar. This is what she referred to as the Bulaga questions. And she said it's unfair. That's why in 2019, you didn't see any crazy questions at all. But even then, it's not always that you have this crazy question. It's just an annual average. Let's see some examples of crazy questions. The 17 exams for mercantile law, you have a crazy question. Under the Nell doctrine, notice, the Nell doctrine is not usually discussed very well in the undergraduate, neither is it discussed in the pre-bar review. That's why a lot of students were caught by surprise on this one and state the exception to the Nell doctrine. Criminal of 2016, you have this crazy question. Explain the cycle of violence. There are others, but it would waste our time if we keep on looking for the other crazy questions. Let me ask you the question now. What is it that looks like a lion, struts like a lion, and roars like a lion? Of course, It is a lion. And therefore, if your answer is presented like that of a bar top notcher, reads like that of a bar top notcher, then you are going to be a bar top notcher. So in our examples, we're going to use answers of bar top notchers. And the examples are mostly pre-war bar top notchers. But the question is, why did I choose pre-war bar top notchers? There's a simple reason for that. I tried to borrow the answer and booklets of bar top notchers who are my relatives, my friends, and former students. Nobody wants to lend me the notebooks. I don't know why, but they don't want to lend me the notebooks. Perhaps they know I'm going to flash it before the students, and the students might see their errors. I'm going to flash my own answers and take note also of my errors so you would know what to avoid. In the field of battle, such as the bar, for example, there is always what they refer to as friendly fire. What is friendly fire? Friendly fire is your comrades shooting at you mistakenly. And therefore, here in the bar exams, there is a high possibility that you might commit mistakes even if you do not know you have committed the mistakes. So watch out for friendly fire. So let's look then at the pattern of how bar questions are answered by bar top notchers in the past. By the way, I forgot. Another reason why I used the answers of previous bar top notchers is that they got very high grades compared now, where the highest average for the past 15 years of those who obtained first place is only 91%. But in the past, they usually get very high. See, let's see. Let's look at Alejo Labrador. He obtained 99% in civil law. He was first place in 1918. Alejo Labrador, by the way, was a former Supreme Court justice. But what I've done here is that I've chosen questions that are current. In short, the questions I'm presenting to you would have a possibility of being repeated in future bar examinations. For example, how is possession acquired? Okay, let's have a look at this. I do remember when I was still teaching civil law review in the past, in the 90s, and I asked this particular question, I get a lot of different answers. And most of the answers that I got was there is possession transferred by means of tradition breva mano, tradition longa mano, tradition constitutum possessorum, etc., etc. But look at the way how Alejo Labrador answered. He answered them using his own words. And notice also that he knows there are three ways. That's why he used the vertical type of presentation, so that the examiner now could see that he has written it in three ways. So let's look at this answer. This is not his handwriting. This is computer writing, which I've adapted. And by the way, you would notice that this is not script. This is actually printed. And this is the manner by which I wrote my bar answers, as you have seen a while ago. And consequently, I'm allowed to use printed in answering the bar questions. Yes, provided you do not capitalize everything. It should be an uppercase and lowercase. Having said that, let's now analyze carefully the answer of Alejo Labrador. That's why he got a very high grade in civil law. He started with a prefatory statement. He knows there are three, so he stated outright. Possession may be acquired in the following three ways. Number one, by material occupation, as when we catch a wild bird that is material seizure or holding. Look at this. If we just stated by material occupation period and then they continued with number two and number three without explaining, he would not have gotten a high credit. But how do you explain? You explain by giving an example, such as this one. By material occupation, as when we catch a wild bird that is material seizure or holding. Number two, by the subjection of things to the actionable will, as when the key to a room. is kept, is placed, is put in our hands so that at any time we may take possession of them. Number three, by formal acts and legal formalities. This method takes place, for example, when incorporeal rights are sold to us and the written document or instrument is executed in favor of the purchaser. Now remember this. These are its own words. You don't see this in books, although in essence, this is what the books provide. Let's have a look at another answer here. This time, you have an almost genius answer, 100%. This was the answer of Justiniano Montano, was former senator, former governor of Cavite, former congressman of Cavite. As an aside, he died at the age of 100. So if you get 100 in any of our subjects, you're liable to die also at 100. Long life. Now, interestingly, in 1929 and before that, there is no fixed schedule for bar examination subjects. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that when you enter the bar examination room, you do not know what subjects you're going to be examined in. It's going to be given at random. So the chairman chooses, is it civil law, is it political law, etc. Unlike now, where there is a fixed schedule. But despite that, you notice, they still got 90s, 100, etc. So the top notches in the past, to my mind, were geniuses. Siguro, genius. The bar top notches now are also geniuses in their own way. But I was wondering, supposing this is the manner by which we're giving bar examinations, no schedules at all. The subjects are going to be given by surprise. And the only time you know the subject would be on the last day by process of elimination. So let's look at the question asked of Justiniano Montano. This time, this is a distinction type. Differentiate between mortgage and sale with the stipulation for a purchase. When you are made to distinguish, please do not define the concepts and lay them side by side because that's not the proper way to distinguish. Instead, what you're going to do will be to look for the areas where they differ, and then after having determined the areas where they differ, explain them. So let's look at the way how we just explained it. Unlike in the case of the first one you've seen, in the case of Labrador answer, he didn't come up with a preparatory statement. Instead, he went directly to the point. Now, question, which is preferable? If you have time, the distinctions are short. I suggest that you should preface it with saying that the distinctions are the following, colon. But take note of how he answered it. He also used the vertical type so that the examiner could see that he has stated all the distinctions. For example, number one, mortgage is an accessory contract, while sale compacto de retro is a principal contract. Notice, in order to distinguish, use the word while. You could distinguish using semicolon. But as you'll notice, if the distinction is very long, the semicolon is going to be drowned by the length of the answer. So for short distinctions, you may use semicolon. But for long distinctions, I suggest you use the word while. Of course, if you want to be consistent, you could keep on using the word while all the time, or you could keep on using semicolon all the time. Number two, in sale with pacto de retro, the title is conveyed, in mortgage not. In sale case, possession is transferred. In mortgage, it is not transferred. In sale with repurchase, title in the vendor becomes absolute the moment the period for redemption expires, semicolon. In mortgage, foreclosure is necessary, whether judicial or extrajudicial. You would notice then that the semicolon is drowned because the distinctions are very. Then you have another genius. The former President Manuel Rojas got 100% in international law and also in other subjects such as remedial law. and he was first placed in the 1913 bar exams. The 1913 bar exams was the first time when the bar exams were conducted in English, and unfortunately, this was the bar year in which the late Claro M. Recto failed in the bar exams. He failed in the bar not because he didn't know his law. He failed in the bar because he didn't know English, because during that time the method of instruction was mostly in Spanish. So he was thinking Spanish, and therefore his thought processes were, uh, were disassembled when the questions were given in English. That's why he failed, not because he didn't know his law, he failed because he didn't know English. So let's look at this. This is another way by which you could distinguish. So the question asked of BIM was this: differences between private international law and public international law with respect to parties affected, with respect to acts to which they refer, and with respect to the remedy applied. So there are three areas of distinction which he must now explain. How did the late President Ross do that? How was he able to come up with an answer that's easy to do insofar as the examiner is concerned? This is what he has done. So there are three areas of distinction, and he has divided this into A, B, and C. So differences between public and private. Public on top regulates the relation between sovereign states, and then private, those of private individuals involving a foreign element. So you could see from this particular area that the examiner could already see the distinctions between public and private international law with respect to the particular. And then B, public of a public character, private of a private character concerning private individuals only, and C, public war or arbitration or mediation, and then following it is private rights of the parties enforced in courts of justice. Let us have a look at theoretical discussion questions, examples of which were given in 2015 and up to 2019. The theoretical discussion questions are similar to definitions, except that the answers are going to be more extended because you must come up with a discussion that covers all the areas involved in that area. So, 2015, when does the recruitment of workers become an act of economic sabotage? 2016, what does doing business in the Philippines under the Foreign Investment Act 1991 mean? Number three, what is now the age of dwelling income tax in the Philippines? Number four, what and whose vote is required for the following acts? The repeal of a tax exemption law. And number five, what is the proper mode of appeal should Ms. X decide to assail or contempt citation? Would the filing of such appeal automatically result in the suspension of the execution of judgment explained as for 2019? So how do we analyze a discussion type of problem? It's similar to the ones that we saw a while ago, except that there are certain variations relative to the manner by which you're going to answer. So, first, we need to find out what you're supposed to do. Are you supposed to discuss enumerated items? Are you supposed to answer yes or no, then discuss? After having done that, as usual, you recall the correct legal rule to apply, and then reflect and visualize the length of the answer. Support your answer through explanation of legal rule. How do you explain the legal rule applied? It's either you illustrate by example or you explain the rationale or public policy considerations behind your answer. Then, as usual, review for missing words, misspelled words, and grammatical errors. Before we look at examples, let's come up with direct responses to theoretical discussion problems. So a regional trial court may issue an injunctive writ without a bond where human rights violations are not necessarily considered as crimes in the Philippines because. So let's look at an example here. This time we have the answer of Paulino Gullias. He obtained first place in 1916, and he got 95.3 in civil law. For those who do not know, Paulido Gullias was the brother of Vicente Gullias, the founder of the University of Visayas. And by the way, he's Cebuano, and there are a lot of our top-notchers coming from Cebu since way back in the 1900s up to the present. Now, the question is an archaic question because it's still referring to the Sangguniang as the municipal council. Furthermore, as we analyze, we shall find out that the answer was correct considering the jurisprudence existing at the time and also the law at the time. But if the question is going to be answered today, then it's not going to be exactly the way by which Paulino Gullias has answered it. So this again is a direct question that has to be answered whether negatively or positively. So let's look at the lead statement here. A municipal council has no right to sell or lease any of its public streets, period. Reasons, colon. If you use this manner of answering, you do not capitalize reasons, you do not underline reasons. Why? Because your paper might be considered as a marked paper. There's an alternative way of answering this. A municipal council has no right to sell or lease any of its public streets because, and then colon. And then he proceeds to list down his reasons. Number one, it cannot sell or lease because such authority is not granted to it by the admissive code or the municipal code. Number two, one of the requisites of purchase and sale contract is ownership in the vendor. But the municipality does not absolutely own the roads. It holds them in trust for the public and that's the right of disposal. Number three, roads are public property and cannot be alienated by sale. They cannot be burdened with the charge or lease because such an act would be to deprive the public of the right to the public property. It would be against public order and public policy. Notice that something seems to be wrong there, especially with regard to reason number two. Reason number one and reason number three are correct, provided you mention local government code and not the municipal code, because we don't have that anymore. But what seems to be wrong with number two? One of the requisites of purchase and sale contract is ownership in the vendor. But the municipality does not absolutely own the roads. It holds them in trust for the public and has no right of disposal. The second sentence is still correct. Municipality does not absolutely own the roads. It holds them in trust for the public and has no right of disposal. But the first sentence is the one that was answered in the light of the law existing at the time. The law existing at the time was the Spanish Civil Code. And under the Spanish Civil Code, in order to sell a property, you must own the property. Under the new Civil Code, it's not necessary that at the time of the sales contract that the vendor must own the property. It is required they must own the property at the time of the transfer of ownership to the buyer. So take note of that. And that's the end of part 3, analytical techniques for objective questions. Let's have a break. Let's eat spaghetti with all the meat there. And then after the break, we shall take up the continuation of analytical techniques for objective questions. So in the meantime, enjoy your break, just chill, and then we'll continue later on.